Greetings, welcome back to the Social Yet Distance. Today I want to talk about poetry, about where it comes from, what it does, and why, after thousands and thousands of years, we still return to it. I'm Jack Farnell, your host for the day on the Social Yet Distance podcast. Poetry is the oldest of all the arts. Long before there were written words, there were poems that were spoken, sung, and remembered. It may even be one of the things that made us human, according to historians who are way smarter than myself. The human brain just seems wired for rhythm, pattern, and story. Those ancient receptors feed the imagination and stir up the emotions. In that way, poetry didn't just reflect culture, it helped to create it. So, what exactly is poetry? Now, I'm not really sure I want to open that debate up here, but I do wonder how can something so ancient still feel so immediate. So let me offer 10 observations I've made along the way that might help us to see what makes poetry different from any other, take note, form of language. First of all, poetry is universal. You can go anywhere on the planet in any century and find, I'd speculate it may be because there's no society without any poetry. So those societies have formed up around the spoken word and the telling of tales. It's a language of the human soul. It's expressed in infinite tongues. Second of all, it's our oldest art form. Before there were brushes, before there was clay, poetry used the body itself, the voice, the ear, the heartbeat, movement, community. Ancient people shaped their words to be remembered because they had no other way to keep their stories alive. Thirdly, poetry was born in oral art. It was a speech made musical, organized through rhythm and repetition so that your memory could hold it. You could say that poetry was one of the very first memory technologies. Fourth, poetry is performative. In pre-literate cultures, it lived in rhythm and motion. It was sung, it was chanted, it was danced. It was meant to sit on a page. It was not meant to sit on a page. It was meant to live in the air. Number five, poetry is mnemonic. Rhyme and meter weren't just about the beauty, they were survival tools. When people recited their myths, their laws, their wisdom, they did it in verse because verse could be remembered word for word, generation after generation. Modern versions use different voice today, love, revolution, or the joy or lack thereof. Often not tales, but just an accounting, or a prescience, cautionary tales wrapped in flowery words. Sixth of all, poetry is evocative. It doesn't instruct by argument, by enchantment. The music of its words lowers our defenses, it stirs the imagination, and it opens doors in the memory that we didn't know were there. It's formal. Number seven, it's formal. The very shape and rhythm of a poem signal that this is special. Special speech, set apart from everyday talk. Even when we read free verse, its visual and rhythmic choices still announce this language asks for your attention. Number eight, poetry is sacred. And in its earliest forms, it was used to speak to the divine, to praise, to mourn, to invoke, to remember. Poets were priests and priestesses, shamans and prophets, and even now, poets like Whitman or Blake seek vision and revelation through line and breath. Ninth, poetry is magical. I'm living proof of that. Long before science, people believed words could change the world, and in a way they still can. A love poem is a spell to move the beloved's heart. An elegy calls the dead back into memory, and even a satire can shrink its target down to a human size. Poetry transforms perception. That is the power of poetry, and that's its charm. So lastly, and finally, poetry civilizes. From Orpheus in Greek myth to the epics of Homer to the Psalms, the Quran, the Vedas, the Book of Kings. Civilizations have risen around poetic memory. Nations find themselves through their poets. A tribe becomes a people when it begins to sing its story. So what then is poetry? Simply put, poetry is a special way of speaking that invites a special way of listening. It's an art of language that carries meaning not only in what is said, but in how it sounds, how it moves, and how it makes us feel. Poetry is the most expressive, memorable way that we know to say what it means to be human. It connects the speaker with the listener and the writer with the reader in a kind of a shared experience. To study poetry is to not only learn about language, but to be transformed by it. Poets have always described this mystery in their own ways. Dante called it truth in beautiful words. Coleridge said that it was best words in best order. Hardy called it emotion put into measure. Emily Dickinson, with her usual candor, said that she knew it was poetry when it felt like the top of her head had to be taken off. In the end, poetry exists to delight, to instruct, to console, and to commemorate. It wakes us up to life, to loss, to wonder, to each other. And that, I believe, is the enduring purpose of poetry, to change in small but meaningful ways the ways that we live.